doing a part 2 class right now called Creating Peace at Home that you weren't required to come to part 1, which is how to set up your family with a foundation, but I am going to reference a couple of points from that first class. So please know that if you were in the first class, there are a handful of you in here, you're going to get a little bit of repetition, but just enough to strengthen those points. And so everybody else in here will feel like they're getting really the whole picture, all right? So you recognize a couple of similarities. So welcome to Creating Peace at Home. How many of you are familiar with the type of child who is really bright, but tends to be manipulative? Because they're so bright, they know how to get their way. And so you engage in power struggles and negotiation, and it feels not very pleasant to be around. How many of you are familiar with this bright type of child? All right. And then how many of you are familiar with this bright type of child who's really good at following directions, doesn't have a need to negotiate, just uses their voice appropriately, is really easy to get along with and express their emotions? How many of you are familiar with that child? All right, so some, but not as many. So what if there was a way to have more of this rather than this? Would you be interested? All right, so we're talking about creating peace at home today, and I am Samantha Sawyer. Currently, I'm a certified parent coach. My background is that I have my master's degree in communication disorders, so I practiced for 7 years as a speech-language pathologist, specializing with children who have autism. And on one end of the autism spectrum is, not currently, actually not anymore, it was eliminated this year, but this diagnosis of Asperger's. Is anybody in here familiar with Asperger's? Which tends to be really highly functioning, has language, does well intellectually and academically, but really struggles with social skills and managing emotions and connecting with others. When I worked with kids with autism, what I learned was my goal areas of developing social skills, regulating emotions, connecting to others, traditional speech therapy techniques were not working. And so I did all sorts of alternative research on holistic ways to get kids' brains in a space for learning. And one of the things I found while doing research is that connecting with others is the greatest predictor of success and happiness in life. And so this was the area where these kids really struggled. So I explored sensory integration, play-based therapy, functional types of social interactions as a way to build kids' self-esteem, self-identity, so that they could then create relationships with other people and strengthen these areas that were weak so they would feel successful as children and in their lives. What I found was that in all of these areas that I researched, that the information I'm presenting to you today applies to all children, but I really wanted to hone in on these bright kids, not necessarily Asperger's, but these bright kids, because when a child has a really strong opinion and they're really gifted, it can be challenging for you to have your voice and for you to have some power in your household. Does this sound right? I'm getting some head nods. All right. What I did is I developed this holistic 5 polka dots approach to find the 5 core areas where kids and families struggle, so that now, as a parent coach with my own business called Brightening Connections in St. Paul, what I do is I work just with parents to teach them to be the specialist. That way the child doesn't have to keep going to therapy and be identified. And instead, parents can shift this behavior and these control and these relationship topics with their child at home, kind of in a hidden manner. So today what we're going to cover are the top 3 holistic ways to boost any child's self-esteem, sense of worth, and because when they feel good as a family, you feel good and life feels really good. I'd love to learn a little bit about you guys. So let's see. I'm just going to ask ages of kids, and is everybody in here parents? Raise your hand if you're a parent. Yeah, parents and grandparents. Okay, and great-grandparents, right? All right, so ages of children, age 0 to 3. Raise your hand. 4 to 7, it's okay to have more than one in these categories. 8 to 12. And 13 to 18. Great. Okay. Yep, so we'll just go up to those teen years. So this is really important because people often think that while the early years are formative in developing a self-identity, the techniques I'm sharing with you today are still applicable to upper elementary school kids and teenagers. So know that you can help influence a child's sense of self even as they grow older. All right? So curious, since I set the stage for this to be about those kids who are bright and like to really have a strong voice in their family, what are the top, I'd love to hear from 3 of you, what is the most challenging situation that you experience over and over and over in your home right now?
Meals.
Every single possible thing in the world.
Arguing about every single possible thing in the world. Anybody else have that problem? Oh, lots. Yep. Okay.
It seems like everything is negotiable.
It's
Like,
yeah.
I love that you are like thinking outside the box and you're gonna grow up and you're gonna be great at sales, but like for now,
Yes.
I just need to be in charge.
Yes, negotiating because a child thinks they're in charge. Anybody in here experience that? Yeah, great. One more topic, one more issue that you experience over and over.
Struggling with failing, not being
yeah.
100%.
Yeah, you know, I'm really glad you said that. I did not make a note to cover that, and we will see if I can get into that today. Lovely. Oh, beautiful, thank you. All right, so I want to share a story with you of a family that started seeing me for parent coaching about a year and a half ago. And a mom called me, and she has a daughter named Tina, who's 7 years old. And mom called me in tears, and she said, Samantha, I don't know what to do. I have done everything that I know to be possible to set my child up for success. I'm a chiropractor, so I give her adjustments every week. We go to craniosacral therapy. We do attachment parenting. We do co-sleeping. I feed her all organic whole foods. Co-sleeping, where the child sleeps in the bed with the parent from a young age. There was one other piece. Oh, and she said, and I had a natural birth, so everything should have been perfect with this child. But it's not. And I want to give my child freedom, so like I let her explore so she doesn't feel like she has these restrictive boundaries in her life. But, you know, it doesn't seem like it's working because whenever she's upset about something, she flies off the handle and screams, now unless it's her way, because I've given her so much choice. And I'm concerned that she's not flourishing. One of the things that really tipped me over was, well, you know, she hits Dad and I when she's really upset. But the problem really is she started hitting her babysitters. And do you know who babysits her? Her grandma. And she hits her grandma. So now this is a problem. Would you agree? Yeah. Right? Right. So fast forward. I love these bright kids. Fast forward to three months later. And Mom says, I have moved from feeling powerless to empowered. You see, the parenting techniques that you've given me have created this lovely little container where my child knows how to follow directions and explore within this space without pushing the limits and pushing me to my limits. She used to fly off the handle, but now she has developed a voice that she knows how to use and express in an appropriate way. And because she has better behavior and better self-control, she gets great feedback at school. Her dad and I are happy to take her out to places in the community. And she can really tell that she is doing a good job as a child, and so she feels good about herself also. My whole family is grateful. So you might be wondering, how could a child who has such a strong, willful voice make such a dramatic change in only 3 months' time? And that's because at Brightening Connections we use this holistic 5 polka dot motion. And it's designed to shift that stress chemistry in the body and teach you how to override it so that you're not bumping up against a wall and it's not a power struggle over and over. So So what we're going to talk about today are 3 holistic secrets from this 5 polka dot potion that will help to, help to create a positive self-identity so that kids feel good and your whole family can have fun together instead of arguing and fighting over the same things over and over. How does that sound? Good. All right. Obviously, we don't have time to cover the whole 5 polka dot potion today. So before we end, I promise I'll give you a way on how to access more of these techniques. All right. So how many of you are used to the child who are used to thinking, I want the child to have freedom, but in the freedom I'm giving them, they're not really flourishing. And instead, I'm ending up with bad behavior, disrespectfulness, and I have to manage every single step of their day. Familiar with that? So then you're going to want to listen carefully to how to create predictability. All right? So in the last class, I talked about the brain and the stress chemistry and how that can flood the body and influence kids' reactions. And in this class, rather than talking about the brain, we're going to talk about tolerance levels, okay? Oh, that's too low. All right, let's do this. So an adult has a range of flexibility that looks something like this. This is their tolerance and their flexibility. So what that looks like is when I wake up in the morning and I get dressed and I take a shower. These are all really things that don't cause a lot of stress in me. So I have lots of flexibility to handle anything that might pop up throughout the day or in the morning. But then let's say I'm going to work and somebody's texting while driving and they hit my car and they go way to the top of my range and I'm really upset here. But because I'm an adult and I'm used to operating in this large range, I'm able to recover fairly quickly and go about my day. I might be residing at a higher level of stress, and there might be medium things that happen, like I have to pick up groceries after dinner, and I was planning on going to Zumba instead, so I might be a little bit stressed. But eventually I'm able to get back down here, and I can work myself in and out of this range before exploding. All right? So with children, they tend to have a range of adaptability that's about this big. Okay? So kids can be flexible for anything that happens in here. Now obviously, because we're all wired in different ways, some kids have a greater range of adaptability or flexibility. But kids who have intense brains and are really bright tend to have a really small window. Have you ever noticed that? Compared to other kids who may not be as bright? Yeah. So what happens is when you are getting them ready to go to school in the morning, they might put their clothes on, but it's got to be a certain texture, because if it's not cotton, they're going to be right about the end here, and you're like, oh man, how's the rest of their day going to go, right? So maybe you get them their cotton shirt, and they can recover over time, and then you make some breakfast for them, and you burn the toast. And they're like, out of this range. They've shot up. They can't handle it. I can't do, you had me first of all put on polyester, and now you burnt my toast. Like, they can't deal with it, right? And so what we're going to talk about today are ways to increase that range of flexibility so that the stress doesn't override their reactions, all right? In the last class, we talked a little bit about, where we talked about this fight or flight mode, or this stress chemistry, and what that looks like in the body. But today we're going to talk more about if a child is outside of the range of adaptability, it's like their brain is on fire. So what I want to share with you are ways to saturate the brain, almost like rain coming in, so that if something has a tendency to spark them, they're going to be less likely to grab it and lose their mind. How does that sound? Good? All right. So the first thing to know is that kids are little scientists, right? So like we talked about with little Tina, when she had a container that didn't have any edges around it, as a little scientist, because that's kids' jobs, what she did is she was testing this and testing this and testing this, and because Mom wanted her to test different things out, when Tina did something that didn't work for Mom, on one day she would be punished for it. But on another day, she would be allowed to do something like that based on Mom's range of flexibility and tolerance for that day. But the problem with kids being little scientists and not creating some sort of container for them to operate in that's really clear is that they don't form any neural pathway that teaches them what is the right way to behave at home and what is the wrong way to behave at home. All right? So one of the greatest mistakes parents make with bright children is that they don't create any rules or schedule. So if you want to saturate the brain so that kids aren't likely to trigger, it's really important to have some sort of predictable routine. So how many of you are familiar with, or how many of you have had a routine as your child was an infant and saw the benefits of that? A feeding schedule, a sleeping schedule, yeah. And then how many of you are successful using a routine with an older child over the age of 3? And then how many of you really struggle with routine at home? Okay, all right, so predictability creates an internal sense of security. So for these children who are really bright and they're exploring so much, it can create overwhelm because there's so many choices that they have, right? So with little kids, we start by giving them choice of what they want to eat or what color dress they want to wear. And we know that choice is good for children, but sometimes with bright children, we actually have to make adult choices so that they can increase their range of flexibility because they don't have to make decisions all the time and test the boundaries. So creating predictability allows them to feel safe inside and not having to make decisions in this really big world that doesn't yet make sense to them. I had a child that I worked with his parents, and he was 3 years old, and his name is Leo. And Leo was kicked out of his Montessori for punching another child in the face so hard that she fell down. And Mom called me in tears and she said, Samantha, if I can't get Leo back into Montessori in 6 months, they're kicking our family out for good. And my husband's family has been in this Montessori for 9 generations. Everybody's pointing the finger at me. But they don't know that I've tried everything that I know how to do, and if I knew what to do, I would obviously do it. And she said, so now I spend all day with this child who's really wild and hyper and amped up and bright. Like he wants to talk to me all the time and hang on me. But I don't know how to shift his behavior, and it feels like I'm imprisoned at home to be with my child all day long. So fast forward to 6 months later, and Mom calls me, and she says, you know, we finally made the decision about Montessori today. We realized that the freedom that Leo had at Montessori was actually a little bit too much for him. Even though he's a bright child, he didn't know how to operate under their rules and structure. And based on the ways you've taught us to create predictability at home, we found that there's going to be another approach that works better for us. And she said, and life feels so much better because I have tools now to do something other than just locking him in his room when he explodes, because I didn't know what to do before. And I can take him out in public, and we can go out to lunch with my girlfriends, and life feels much better. So the important thing about Leo and the schedule that we created to help him have a strong sense of self and rhythm throughout his day, the first thing was developing a visual schedule. So I bet if you think of one time of the day where your child is the most off, where you have to tell them every single step along the way of the day, and that section of the day, that is the first place where you need to create a visual schedule. Okay, so for Leo, it was in the morning. So he woke up in the morning and he didn't know what days Dad was going to be there and what days Dad wasn't, because that influenced his schedule. See, Dad was the owner of a funeral home, and so whenever there was a death, then he would have to go and attend to that. And so Leo would wake up, and because he didn't know what to expect, as a bright child, they tend to need to know what to expect and have more predictability. It started his day on the wrong foot. And so in the morning routine, what I often recommend is to find 5 steps. But you might already be thinking ahead and wondering, well, wait a minute. My child doesn't like to follow routine. How am I going to get their buy-in? Is anybody thinking that? In setting a routine up? Right. So whether your kid's 11 or 3 years old, the thing to do is to list the first 3 steps that are really typical and easy to perform. So for Leo, it was, we had to do baby steps. Get out of bed, come downstairs, say hi to mom. And sitting at the breakfast table was really hard for him. So we inserted the 4th step as being the one that was really challenging, so sit at the table. And the 5th step was a reward. When you sit at the table, you get 10 minutes of playtime with your trucks at the table in the morning. When you're able to layer in a reward, immediately following the thing that's challenging, and asking your child what they would like that reward to be, you're more inclined to get them on board and following a rhythm so that you can create predictability and an internal sense of security, where they're able to self-manage their emotions longer and longer. So that predictability helps to then, when they do that over and over, it starts to widen that and develop that range of flexibility. Does that make sense? Okay. So I'm curious to hear from you all, because there's a couple of common times of day where kids really struggle. So 2 or 3 of you, shout out the time of day that's the worst in your home. After school, before bed, and?
Mealtime.
And mealtime. Mealtime's really hard. So let's come back to mealtime at the end if we have time, because maybe we'll explore that deeper, because a few of you mentioned that. So let me cover 2 more secrets, okay? So the first way to shift your kid from mad to glad is to create predictability. And the second one is you must shift the power. Oh yeah, we'll use mealtime in this one. This sounds great. So if you're thinking, all right, well, I understand creating predictability, but it might be too late in my family, because to be honest with you, the schedule really revolves around my child and their behaviors and their voice. Does anybody feel like that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you want to pay close attention to how to shift the power. So I'm going to use an analogy that I used in my first class, if you guys will all bear with me. And that is, if I can call on you 2 in front. So let's say that you speak German and you speak English, all right? And you only speak German, you only speak English, and you need to get your message across. How are you going to convey that information? Gesturing.
Gesturing.
Sure, you're going to
I
gesture.
tried that word.
But that doesn't sink in, and your message isn't conveyed. So what are you going to do next? Your gestures don't work, sorry.
I'm a jerk, I'd leave.
This is an interesting point. So you would just walk away and you would give up, right?
Yeah.
So then, and what would you be feeling?
Frustrated,
Yeah.
mad, irritated, like
Right.
I feel.
Like you feel, this is beautiful for bright kids, right? So frustrated, mad, I feel like I failed, I can't get through. So with children, if they had a way to express something to us as adults, but we didn't get it, what kind of way do you think they would behave?
They would leave, scream, cry.
Leave, scream, cry. Anything else? Can you picture your kid?
Get aggressive.
Big, huge one, especially bright kids. They're going to get aggressive because they have a very strong opinion. So if their language isn't getting through to you, they're going to talk louder and they're going to become more aggressive because their opinion is really, really important. So what's happening is they're trying to use their voice in a powerful way and it's not working. And so you're instead responding to their behavior rather than the message underlying the behavior. So I ask parents to put on a behavior detective hat and explore what is the message underlying any behavior that is explosive and aggressive in your home. That's the first way that I want you to shift your perspective. And then I want you to try something different. Like, what do you do about it if my child's expressing something different and I can't get to the root of the behavior because I'm used to thinking that they're behaving because they're naughty or because they're controlling or because they're manipulative or because they like their way. And so I'd love to use an example of mealtime as a way to demonstrate this next technique. So if you wouldn't mind sharing in the back what the mealtime scenario looks like in your home.
It's just really drawn out. He doesn't have good attention at mealtime, gets up from the table a lot, wants to wander or play rather than sitting and...
Yeah, so he wanders and plays. He doesn't have a long attention span to sit down at mealtime. And how do you typically, how old is your child?
4.
4. And how do you typically respond?
Well, we put him back several times, but
Yeah.
after the 20th time of reseating him in his chair, it's
Right. What kind of things do you find yourself saying to him?
we just tell him he needs to eat his food so he has energy to play or to do whatever the next thing is going to be.
Right. Great. So I appreciate you sharing that. And one of the reasons I asked you that specific is because there are some people in here from the first class, and we talked about language that adults use that doesn't sink in well to kids. So even if you're being really consistent with putting him back, when we use things like logic, because their brains aren't fully developed yet, it doesn't sink in. So a more advanced level technique would be to get to their emotion, and I'm going to talk about this in a different way than I did in the first class, which is talking to your child outside the moment of infraction. So one of the greatest mistakes we make as adults is when our child is misbehaving in the moment, they are flooded with stress chemistry, which means that this is really teeny tiny instead of being really tolerant and flexible. And so the logic doesn't sink in. So the first thing to do is to set up a time of day where you can have a conversation that feels really warm and friendly, rather than we gotta sit down and have a talk about what you did wrong. Because if you have a bright child, what is the first thing that happens when you want to talk to them, especially about feelings and something they did wrong? Zone out and busy.
Get defensive.
Defensive, huge. Shame, embarrassment, huge. Right? So instead what I ask you to do is to identify what that situation feels like to you in really simple terms. So what would you say? You would say, mealtime feels really what? In 4-year-old language.
I don't know.
Boring.
Boring. Boring is a good one. Frustrating, irritating, upsetting, unpleasant. Whatever word it is that you want to use. And you say, mealtime feels really boring or unpleasant. How do you want it to feel?
Happy, fun.
Yeah, happy, fun, easy. So then you say, and this works with kids who are like 15 years old, meal times feel really unpleasant. I want them to feel fun. And so what you do is you then rehearse the situation, you become like a news reporter. And you report both sides of the situation. You say, you know what usually happens at mealtime in this kind of lighthearted tone so that they don't trigger and start shutting you off? What usually happens at mealtime, I usually put food on the table and you're really good at coming to sit down, but then after you take 2 bites, you dash off and go play with toys, and then I get mad, and so I come and I chase you, and I plop you back down into your seat, and then you take 2 more bites, but then I think you might be mad because you're off again and running, and you just keep going on and on and on, reporting both sides of the situation. And then you say, that makes me really frustrated. How does it make you feel? Kids as young as 3 can do this exercise. And I don't have to ask a question here. So I'm encouraging you to start eliciting your child's voice outside the moment of the infraction and in a problem-solving sort of situation so that they learn how to express themselves in a way that's appropriate. And they don't have to get loud because you're creating a situation where you start speaking the same languages because you're putting that emotional frustration piece at ease. So then after you identify your feelings, you say, what could we do differently next time so that we both feel good? You're frustrated, I'm frustrated, you're bored, what could we do different? And I encourage you that as long as your child's answer is reasonable, to accept it and do it. So if he says, well, I'm going to sit on the floor, could you say, well, on Saturdays at lunch we could sit on the floor? Or if he says, well, I just don't want to eat, right? There's that, oh, I don't want to eat, and then gets rebellious. Well, no, that's not really going to solve it because we both have to feel happy. And I feel happy when you eat. What else could we do? And you kind of dig in this way, and what you're doing is you're helping your child learn problem-solving skills at a time where their brain is receptive to it versus in the moment of infraction. This is a beautiful way to give bright children a voice, and it teaches them to, or it sets the stage for them being more respectful because you've asked for their input. So when you allow your child to solve a situation using this kind of format, then they're more likely to be respectful and buy into this change because they've offered the solution. That's why it's really important for you to allow this step if it's reasonable. Does that make sense? I don't know if, have any of you ever had a boss who, I'm going to make sure I can catch everyone's faces here. It's like, I always got one that I'm missing, I'm so sorry. Have you ever had a boss where you had some sort of great idea and they didn't listen to you because, you know, in the corporate setting, this is how things are, and it'd just be too much shifting and change? Have anybody had a boss like that? How did you feel towards them? Irritated, yeah. I've had that happen to me as well, and I'm definitely an innovator. And so when I have a strong opinion and a voice and somebody doesn't listen to me, either because I'm not speaking management language or he's not speaking employee language, it creates so much friction that we can't have a good relationship. And so because he won't listen to my idea of how to implement the 5 polka dot potion system-wide, then when he asks me to do something, guess what I do? Nope, sorry. No room for that. So it's important to know that this is true for bright children who have that willfulness or that strong need for a voice. And of course we want everybody to express their voice, but I want you to know this about bright children in particular, that we have to find ways of creating space for them to use their voice. Okay, so that's one of the ways to shift the power and bring more respect into your home. So, let's see, so to help your home feel good and your child have a positive identity, the first one is what? Create predictability. The second one is shift the power. That's right. So then the third one is living in a child's world. So if you're wanting to have more fun in your home and like invite that playful energy in so that you can really enjoy your child, because they have great imagination and great ideas because they're bright especially, but you can't seem to like get there. Like, how do we infuse happy chemicals and fun into our home because there's so much negotiation and power struggle all the time, it just feels bad? Then I want you to stay with me here as we talk about living in a child's world. So how would you classify an adult's world? What would you say an adult's world is made of?
Responsibilities.
Responsibilities. Quiet.
Organized, peaceful.
Oh, organized. I'm going to choose that one in particular.
It's very routine at times.
Routine. Yeah, or like adult world, it's kind of mundane.
Structure.
Maybe, or not?
I think, yeah, what she said, structured.
Yeah, structured.
Yes.
That's a good
Social
one.
norms.
Yeah, there's like, it's like a box. Like living in an adult world, there's all these expectations and boundaries, right? So, one of the things that I realized with gifted children is that living in an adult world shrinks their range of flexibility because they're so expansive and visionary. So to live in a child's world, what do you think their primary occupation is? Play. You got it. Kids just want to play. Play is like a vacation to a child in terms of flexibility and what it does for the stress chemistry in your body. So in the same way, you might be really good at following your boss's instructions for 50 weeks of the year, right before your 2-week vacation. And then he says something like, oh yeah, you can go play on your vacation, but first, I want you to make your bed. Or first, if we're using an adult example, but first, I want you to tidy up that report or that stack of paper on your desk. What are you going to say? That's what I'm, right? That's what you're going to say.
You gotta be kidding me.
You're kidding me. Why?
I just worked for 50 weeks.
I just worked for 50 weeks. I held it together. I have this much tolerance left. And this stack of paper, this making my bed, insignificant. Does anybody notice their family dynamic or their child in this situation?
That's almost word for word what our daughter says.
Which part?
The whole, I have done everything that I need to do today, and now you guys want me to wipe off the plates, man? Yeah, I've done that.
Right, you want me to wipe off the placemat? Done. So the way to infuse your child with happy chemicals and increase her range of tolerance is to live in her world. And I have the easiest way to do it. And that is setting aside 15 minutes of uninterrupted playtime is like sending a child on vacation. When you set aside 15 minutes of uninterrupted play every single day, it helps for when their range starts collapsing, it helps to bring it up again. And so the more you do that, over time that range grows and grows and grows, and you're able to get more cooperation and compliance because you're spending more time in the child's world. They're willing to do more, spend more time in our adult rule-based world.
Does that play with the, engage with the parent?
Yes, with the parent. Good question, thank you.
Does it play 2 hours, 2 hours?
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Yeah.
Alone.
Right, right, and lots of kids can play all day long, but it's like, so I'm going to ask, this is a thought I get, and I heard a little muttering up here. What if you said, does anybody here go, ugh, I hate playing? Yeah? Yeah, I used to say that too, and I was like an autism play specialist. I had to figure out real fast how to play. So if you were at my first class, you know that we spend so much time as adults living in this logical side of our brain where there's lots of order and structure and organization that when it comes to play, we're like, right? Like, what do I do with this toy cow? Or the other thing we do is we sit on the couch and we sit there and we say, oh yeah, that's a cool train set. Oh, I love how you're pushing that across the floor. And we oversee and we narrate without ever playing. Does that sound real to anybody?
Yes.
Yeah. So when you set aside 15 minutes of uninterrupted playtime, the first thing you do is you join your child. So you don't have to come up with some amazing theme, which is speech therapists. Oh my gosh, we're amazing at coming up with themes. We're like preschool teachers, right? Like, oh, I'm going to decorate my room for Halloween and Thanksgiving and have this whole theme around pumpkins. And the kid comes in and they're like, I'm not doing that, right? So instead of that, instead of me initiating and creating that, I learned all I have to do is join what they like. So put out a few toys on the floor. Of course, if you're living at home, there's already toys on the floor, if we're honest, right? And so maybe right before dinner, what you do is you go into the living room and you sit down with them and you start, rolling the car around, sit next to them building a craft, doing some drawing. Anything that's not social media, that actually doesn't count as play when it's screen time. So doing that and joining them allows them to see that their world is really important. The next thing you do is you follow their lead. So if it's like Rapunzel is climbing up the curtain and, oh no, I'm stuck and it's on fire, then you pick up Brown Bear and you're like, oh no, you just follow them. Oh no, I'm climbing up the curtain too, it's on fire, what do we do? And you let them walk you through it. Now really oftentimes with bright children, as adults we think that we have to come up with something amazing or we don't like the type of play kids are doing. There was a child when I used to do speech therapy who was 11 years old, and he loved playing lightsabers. I'm like, oh, I'm a 30-year-old woman. Like, I don't like doing lightsabers and all that. But when I did it for 15 minutes, the remaining 75 minutes of our session, he was on. He was in, because I spent time in his world. So following your child's lead gives them control, a sense of self, and a voice, and increases that range of adaptability.
I have a question on that, just because I have 3 boys, and I do sometimes engage like that.
Yeah.
But getting them to shut down
Yeah.
after 15 minutes of play is extremely difficult. Getting to get back to that focus is, like, if I wrestle with them, it's up. Now, we're not gonna be able to shut down, and someone's gonna get in trouble.
Yeah.
Now, because it's gonna get out of control.
Beautiful example. Thank you for bringing that up.
Mhm.
So what you do is you come back to shifting the power,
Mhm.
and you design it together.
Mhm.
So you say, I love playing with you, and I want to play with you for 15 minutes every single day. Maybe you don't have to say it exactly like that.
Mhm.
But then you say, but last time we did it, like, I said that I wanted to leave, and you came and you tackled me at the knees. And then I was really upset, and we had all this fun time playing together, so I'm upset, and how did you feel?
Mhm.
Well, I felt sad, because I wanted you to keep playing, or whatever. And they might not even say that, and so at that point with boys, you can label it.
Mhm.
And you say, well, that's not going to work. I want to play with you 15 minutes a day, and I want to wrestle. What can we do different next time?
Mhm.
So you're shifting the power of them being in control to you having some say in it also.
Mhm.
How does that sound?
Not very applicable.
Oh, not
To be
applicable.
honest, yeah, I don't know that my kids can shut off like that. Like,
Yeah.
after 15 minutes, they're really in it and they're really having fun.
Yeah.
And now, that's not, so I don't know how that would work for my
Yeah.
children.
And for parents also, you know, when we talk about it now, yes, but when it's right there
Yeah.
happening, you start yelling and, you know, I'm not going to do it ever again.
Right, like,
Right.
well, now
That's the
our time
reaction.
is up. Well, no, now they really want to play.
Right.
You know,
Right.
so kind of hard.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. So in that case, you know, there are lots of techniques I could give you to give you just 2 little short answers, and it may or may not sit with you, and well, let's just be okay with that for now.
Right, sure.
One of them is when kids do rough and tumble play, they have a hard time self-soothing afterwards.
Mhm.
And so you can insert something, you can structure your activities back to back so they get a really deep type of muscle input that feels rhythmic and calming. So things like, all right, when we're done playing, let's do 10 handstand push-ups. So it's a way to provide sensory input into their muscles and their joints, and it shifts that stress chemistry and allows that to grow bigger instead of being all wild and ramped up.
Right, yeah, that makes sense.
So that's one way. The other way is you can design the alliance by saying after our playtime, when it's wrestling and rough and tumble, then you go outside for an hour.
Mhm.
So I hope that's applicable in some small way.
Yeah, that could be.
Okay, great. I'm just going to check the time here. Great.
Mhm.
So so obviously, you know, even just talking about living in a child's world versus living in an adult's world, that probably makes sense and allows you to shift your perspective a little bit about your bright child who likes to have a strong voice. But I wanted to share an example of what we do with children who are adopted, in particular internationally adopted. Who knows what a family has to do at home when a new child enters their home in terms of the schedule and how to connect with them? Does anybody know? Like what some of the guidelines are? One of them, to help children acclimate and bond, is to set aside special and uninterrupted time. So this is applicable to kids who are in pretty significant distress in a totally new environment and have a lot going on. And the heavy hitting piece of how do we help them bond so they have a positive self-identity and family cohesion from the beginning. And that is eliminate distractions, don't allow a bunch of new people to come in, don't play and text and cook dinner at the same time. Like, spend special attention with them every single day. So whenever you're looking at helping, like if you feel like there's like this friction and you're not really bonding well with your child, remember that special, uninterrupted time can have really positive and a powerful impact. sometimes people say, well, how do I know if I'm playing the right way? And one of the first things I learned when I was doing some alternative research in the field of neuroscience and autism was that you can tell your child's brain is in a space for learning, that they're receptive, that what you're doing is getting through and impacting them during play, is when there's a twinkle in the eye. So you can actually measure the sparkle factor in a child's eye. From neuroscience, they can actually do that. So I encourage you, when you live in your child's world, to pay attention to the sparkle factor of their eyes. You can watch it shift. And that's how you know you're on the right track. Incidentally, if you're playing lightsabers all the time, and you look in the mirror, you might notice your own sparkle factor. Okay? So, let's see. So before we close here, I do want to answer a couple of questions that frequently come up when I do workshops. And one of them is, this is really simple. Can this really work? Especially with my bright children, where we've tried lots of different things. And the other thing is there more? Is there more to this, right? Is it just, it's not standalone techniques, right? And the answer to both of these is yes. It's very simple, and there is more, and they really work. And so as a special thank you to the school district for inviting me in, this is my first time here in this district today, I'm going to give you a special offer. I believe that everybody should have access to this 5 polka dot system, not 10, 5. And so I've created a 5 polka dot questionnaire that you can fill out, and we can go over what areas are really strong in your family and what areas are lacking, that where you could create some improvement so that you would have more joy and peace at home. Now, 1 hour of my individual time is typically $150, but as a special offer and thank you today, I'm offering it for $20. And so if that's something that interests you, you can sign up with Kelly at the back of the room before you leave today. There's one catch. And the catch is that these techniques and this approach is not for everybody. So please know that if you sign up, please do show up, because I'm able to serve only 14 families per week. And if you come and see me and we're a good fit, I'll let you know. And if we're not, I'll let you know that too. But it gives you an opportunity to go a little bit deeper and talk about your family circumstances. Okay? So we do have time. We have about, I think we're about 5 minutes again. Good time. 3 to 5 minutes for questions. Please try to make sure your questions are relevant to the whole group. I know sometimes we get into a little bit more of a personal nature. So what questions do you have?
Someone in the back had asked about, failing, like when your kids
Thank
fail.
you.
How,
Yes.
because my son is like, he earns it honestly, but he's like a perfectionist where
Yeah.
he's naturally good at things, so then when he's not, he just wants to quit right away and he gets frustrated.
I totally hear you. So the question is, what do you do when kids are perfectionists and they really struggle with failing? There are 2 really powerful ways to infuse the body with happy chemicals to improve that range of tolerance. The first one is to praise effort. So rather than saying when you're done with your 30 minutes of math homework, then you get a treat or a reward, when he's at the 8-minute mark, which is where he usually melts down, you say, oh, you've been working on math for 8 minutes? I can tell. When you put in the time, it makes me really proud of you, because that can be hard to just put the time in. So focusing on the process rather than the product, powerful way to keep kids going and to catch it before they peak. Is that helpful? Mm-hmm. The second way comes from the Nurtured Heart Parenting approach. I don't know if any of you saw that booth down there at the resource fair. But it's a phrase of heartfelt appreciation. When you, I feel because. That's the structure of the phrase. So to say something like, what does he lose? What does he want to be perfectionist on other than homework?
Say it's sports.
Sports. Okay. What sport is his favorite?
We'll just say like catching a football.
Catching a football. Okay.
I told him to think, like, you love Oreo dessert, pretend like it's Oreo dessert coming at you, and you just want to catch it really bad.
Oh, yeah.
Or something. So, like, we try different things, but he's just not automatically good at things. I tried to explain, like,
Right.
we all have to learn, we're not all good at everything, you
Right.
know, but.
So you can say, when you keep trying to catch the football, because part, it creates a map in the brain that says, this is what, because I'm trying to get better. You implant the message that he's actually trying to get better, instead of, I have to be perfect and I'm bad and I'm doing it wrong. So it's really wonderful. Okay? Good. Is there one more quick question? Okay, so let's do a little recap. The top 3 ways to help your child develop a positive self-identity so it feels good at home are create predictability, shift the power, and live in the child world. So in closing, if you're like me, these tools come as a relief because they're holistic, they don't require medication, they don't require a therapist, they're things you can do at home, and you actually see results. If you're like any of my clients, they often say, similar like I said in the first class, that these ideas are really simple, but like you said back, they're not easy. When you're in the moment, it's not easy. So you do have to be intentional about trying these new techniques, and then looking at what happens and letting that feedback inform how you're going to continue. But I encourage you to keep trying these over and over, because these are fundamental principles of working with kids who are bright and gifted. And in 10 years' time, I've boiled it down from all of these areas of study to these 3 techniques because they work over and over with every family that I see. So know that when you fall off the bicycle, right, you get back on and you keep on trying, because if our kids are perfectionists, there tends to be a little bit of perfectionist in the adult as well. So I hope that you have some tools that are empowering and that help your kids show their lovely, gifted performance bright sides. And thank you for coming here today. You're welcome. I do have a newsletter that's free to sign up for if you want parenting tips once a month in your inbox.